So in my Wisp video, I got bullied in the comments for forgetting like 2 strength modifiers, because apparently 700% strength wasn't good enough. So this time I'm not going to pretend I have literally every single crit buff in the game for making this build as funny, but I am still red critting with a weapon that has 5% base crit chance, and that weapon is Landslide. If you didn't know, Landslide does have its own stats, you can look at them on the wiki, and its base crit is 5. And if you want to make a melee weapon good, you gotta crit with it. So in this build, we're going all in on making this thing crit. And there's 2 things that can actually make this weapon consistently red crit. And those are Ceramic Dagger Incarnon and Arcane Avenger. The most important things here is you need both Rubble Heap and Path of Statues so you can spam your 1. This is very good because it's double damage and no energy, because you're going to be spamming the fuck out of your 1. And Path of Statues just gives it so you don't need to press your 3. If you do want to use Orgaze instead, you could run this using Orgaze instead of Path of Statues, and I would suggest using Ensnare instead of Roar, because you want to have a grouping ability to group up all the enemies for Petrify, but you want to not ragdoll them, and Ensnare keeps them standing, so Ensnare is the best grouping for Atlas specifically. But I don't care about Orgaze, so we're just going to run this. You don't have to run Roar. You can still do millions of damage without it. It's just really good. You could basically pick whatever helmet you want. If you want to use Ensnare in this too, you can. But the main thing is Arcane Avenger for a flat 45% crit chance increase. So on a lot of Avenger builds, you will run Combat Discipline, so whenever you get a kill, it procs Avenger. However, Atlas has a little bit of weird shit where you are invincible during your 1, but only to your health. Your shields can still take damage. And because your shields can still take damage during your 1, that still procs Avenger and it has basically 100% uptime. So we don't have to worry about running Combat Discipline, and we can not form this and just use Steel Charge for more melee damage. And Arcane Fury does actually increase the damage of Landslide. Things that increase melee damage increase Landslide, but some things like the melee arcanes, as far as I can tell, none of the melee arcanes actually proc off of Landslide. But melee buffs like Fury do buff it. And I don't have it maxed, but I'm still dealing millions of damage. You don't need this, but it is a thing that can increase your damage. Another thing to note is I have 3 Violet Archon Shards here, and I'm using Prime Flow to get the full effect of these. Each of these gives 50% melee crit damage multiplier, which is pretty good because we're red critting, so we're getting that multiplier a lot. If you're not going to use these, you don't need to run Flow in the build, and you also don't need these. And then I have some Casting Speed Shards just because Punch Fast is nice. But again, you don't really need shards, but it does make the number funnier. The second most important thing is Ceramic Dagger Incarnon, and that is because of the final trait here. This 30% crit chance increase applies to your pseudo exalts. This is why Ceramic Dagger is basically the best stat stick for all pseudo exalts. But specifically for Atlas, we need this crit multiplier that is base. The other perks here is this doesn't really matter, and range doesn't really matter because we're not using this weapon. If you want to, you could swap to it to hit its Incarnon mode because your Landslide does build combo, so you can have Incarnon mode up, which, you know, it's okay. But we're not really using any of that. And this is the build. So we are using both Primed Heavy Trauma and Collision Force, and that's because Landslide is impact. So these very, very much increase your damage. Other than that, we're going crit mons here, and we're going raw damage. So because Spoiled Strike doesn't slow down Landslide, it's just more damage. Prime Pressure Point, just more damage. And because we're actually getting good crits with all of our shit we're adding up, Blood Rush and Gladiator Might, and the and Sacrificial Steel, we're getting a bunch of crit chance and damage. As far as I can tell, Melee Arcane does not matter at all. Landslide cannot trigger any Melee Arcane. Tennokai mod doesn't matter, we're not using this weapon. You just want this build for a bunch of raw damage increasing and crit damage increasing. The weapons in this build also don't really matter. I'm using the Rauta. It's not built up like at all. I'm just using it because like I can shoot a guy to like continue my combo. It doesn't matter, you can use whatever primary you want. I don't even have it fully built up. I would suggest using a primer. Epitaph primer is just good If there's like an Eximus or an Acolyte, you can prime them before you landslide them. You don't need to though, especially because the companion of this build is I am using the Panzer Oberpfeiler. You can use a Darza to get more crit chance, but you can red crit without it. And I think that the viral that the Panzer provides is better overall. So I would suggest using a Panzer instead of using an Adarza, but you can use an Adarza. You also can use Nautilus for grouping, but you just run around punching everything anyways. You don't really need it.